Good morning, folks. I see people are trickling in. Apologies for the couple minutes that we needed to get things organized on the technical side. Just as folks are joining us, I'll go ahead and introduce myself and the team here. My name is Kim Menounos. I'm with the Fraser Basin Council out of the Northern Interior Office, which is located in the Lheidli-T'enneh Territory at the confluence of the Nechako and Fraser Rivers in the city known as Prince George. I also have with me today from our team here at Fraser Basin Council, Tasha Peterson. She'll be sort of running the show behind the scenes. If anyone has any trouble hearing or if you have any specific concerns or comments, please use the chat and we'll get to those right away. And then let's see. So we have a great program for you. I'm going to share my screen here in a moment. But before I do, I will also introduce Jeremy Vendetti, who's here from Simon Fraser University. Jeremy will be speaking shortly. And also Greg Witzke. Greg is with the Fraser Salmon Management Council, and Greg is going to help us open the meeting with a prayer. Over to you, Greg.
Thank you, Kim. Hello, everyone. Greg Witzke requests. My name is Greg Witzke, Kalmuk to Sukakakuru, peoples of the Shuswap Nation. I was involved with the 3 years project prior to today's webinar, and I was also involved quite deeply with the Big Bar landslide itself when it occurred in 2019. I spent a lot of time out in Lillooet. So I firstly want to acknowledge all the Indigenous nations and the communities in whose traditional territories the Fraser Landslides research project occurred. I believe that open and transparent engagement, experiencing our traditions and knowledge and our cultural ways will be critical to the next steps of this initial research project. So a major goal of this important project was to nurture sincere relationships that will endure and enable us to work collaboratively to better understand the past, present, and future of any landslides impacts in the Fraser Canyon. And another important goal, and why we're here today, is to develop a collaborative body to move forward with the next steps identified in that 3-year phased research project. So, our ancestral knowledge has taught us that salmon are our spiritual relations and must be treated with respect to ensure they are honored, thereby continuing to provide for Kalmuk, that's humans, and the ecosystem for 7 generations to come. So that being said, I'd like to open up with a quick blessing in my language, which is Squakwakstream, and set the tone for a good webinar today, and hopefully the information shared is taken in and people have some good thoughts so that we are successful in our endeavors to collaborate in the future. So, Creator, we thank you for today. Creator, we thank you for our guiding spirit. Creator, we thank you for everything. That is all. Thank you, everyone. Back to you, Kim.
Greg. Appreciate that. Let's see, I'll share my screen. Oops. Go to the start here. All right. Let's get started with the information that we're here to share. Here's our agenda for today. We'll provide I'll just give you a brief overview of the project, and then we'll turn it over to Jeremy Vendetti, as I mentioned, from Simon Fraser University. And then we have a great video to share that was produced by Hakai Institute, who is one of the partners on the project. we have a bit of discussion after a short break, which I hope that will be folks will really engage with and share your thoughts. I'll ask if everybody could please keep their microphone muted, and if you're having connectivity issues, try turning off your camera, and we'll let you know if we need to turn off your camera or your microphone for our sake. Tasha is going to be working behind the scenes on the technical stuff. So if you have comments or questions, please you can use the chat function to get her attention. And then when there are questions for the speakers, we'll use the chat again to moderate those questions. In the meantime, if everyone would be so kind to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name, your organization, or affiliation, and if you could identify the territories from which you're joining us today, that would be terrific. So we'll be sharing today the results and work of the BC SRIF funded Fraser Landslides research project that took place between 2021 and 2024. So Jeremy will be presenting the results. And time permitting, we'll address a couple of technical questions at the end of his talk. So if you have very specific technical questions about the process or the analysis or the data on that research, feel free to put them in the chat. And then as I mentioned, after the break, there will be more time for discussion. So the full title of the project was Landslide Impact on Flow Dynamics, Fish Migration, and Genetics of Fraser River Salmon. So this was a 3-year project to support long-term habitat restoration and salmon management. This was a science partnership of university-based researchers collaborating with First Nations, NGOs, and DFO scientists. And one of the alternative benefits of the research project is building relationships with traditional knowledge holders in the Fraser Canyon where the research took place. And then, and in the spirit of that, the relationship building as well as information sharing, several workshops were held to open up dialogue and connect with those communities. So within the project, there were the sort of the past themes of how past landslides impacted the Fraser River and salmon. In the present, considering about 5 or 6 years ago was sort of the present, the Big Bar landslide happened. And then the future, where will the next landslide likely occur, and how might it impact salmon? So the role of the Fraser Basin Council here was to collaborate with Greg in liaising with and connecting with the nations and on their different lands and concerns and interests in the project. So as always, of course, so many partners help make a project a success. SFU, as mentioned, was the lead proponent with Fraser Basin Council coordinating, and Fraser Salmon Management Council's Greg Witzke as the liaison. The Hackeye Institute provided the critical data and some analysis, pardon me, as well as the video that you're going to see in a little bit. Other research partners include the University of Northern British Columbia, the University of Victoria, the University of Massachusetts, Durham University, and Fisheries and Oceans Canada scientists. So I'm pleased to turn it over to Jeremy for his presentation about the research project. And I'll stop sharing. Over to you, Jeremy. Tasha, am I sharing Jeremy's presentation? Okay, good.
Okay, there we go. Everybody can hear. Somebody give me a thumbs up that I'm okay. Okay, there we go. And you can see my presentation okay, so I can go ahead and begin. So I'll start out by saying thanks to Kim and Tasha for inviting me to talk here at the webinar, and I want to thank you all for coming to the webinar. Sorry, I'm just having a little technical issue here on my end. Not sure what's going on. Oh. There we go. Okay. Yeah, Phil, first of all, thanks for Kim and Tash for inviting me to talk here today. And thanks all of you for joining the webinar. What I'm going to talk about today is the risk of river blocking landslides of salmon populations in the Fraser River in British Columbia. The work I'm going to talk about today started with an investigation into the Big Bar landslide and its impacts, but then it grew into a much broader investigation of how landslides impact salmon in general. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about the Fraser River and its salmon runs. I'll then try to summarize what exactly happened at Big Bar from a Western science perspective. I want to talk then about our hunt for past landslides in the Fraser River to try to understand those landslides that might have impacted salmon in the past. And then I want to turn our attention to trying to predict the future, which is a difficult thing to do. But we have made attempts to do that. And we've identified a bunch of places where we think future landslides might happen in the Fraser. And I'd like to review those with you. And then I want to turn away from the negativity and of talking about natural disasters, and then talk a little bit about things we can start doing to prepare for the next landslide that's going to impact the Fraser. So it's hard to really explain how important the Fraser is in Western Canada. Of course, the river is huge. It has a drainage basin that is larger than Great Britain. It's a big river. There's not a lot of people that live outside of Vancouver and some of the major population centers. And it's by world standards, it is a big river. It has a single peak hydrograph that has peak flows up around about 10,000 cubic meters per second in the lower mainland of British Columbia. And just for some context, when I say that number 10,000 cubic meters per second, that's about 4 Olympic-sized swimming pools flowing down through the river every second. So it's an absolutely enormous volume of water. The river sort of gives us things, but it also presents some danger occasionally. The Fraser Valley is the center of British Columbia's agricultural production. The Port of Vancouver is the largest port in Canada, and it's the third largest port in North America in terms of the amount of material that goes through it. And it, of course, is built on the Fraser Delta. The Fraser River flows through the most densely populated parts of Western Canada. And we sometimes forget, particularly those of us who live down the lower mainland or in some of the bigger communities along the Fraser, we forget how powerful the river is because we have flood defenses in places like, the Fraser Valley in Vancouver. But I know that in some of the smaller communities, there's a bit of fear every year that comes along with the spring floods. Because there is a chance that the river could wash communities away, and so we sort of have this impression that the river gives us things, but it can also take away if we're not careful. The part of the reason why I think everybody's here today is the Fraser River hosts Canada's largest salmon runs, and it is one of the biggest natural salmon runs in the world. The upstream migration of salmon from the ocean to their inland spawning grounds is really epic. When I tell people internationally how far the salmon have to swim and the elevation that they have to climb to get back to their ancestral spawning grounds, people are often impressed and surprised. And so that 1,000-kilometer trip that fish make from the ocean to their ancestral spawning grounds includes travel through a gauntlet of commercial fishermen, through the indigenous fishery, and then, of course, through a 375-kilometer bedrock canyon. And it's difficult to imagine how a fish could get up through that canyon. The flows there are very intense. But of course, they're able to do it. And that makes them, I think, a really remarkable animal. And of course, salmon are indigenous to indigenous culture. And as I understand it, indigenous ancestors followed the salmon inland from the coast to populate their traditional territories in the Fraser. And we often hear that indigenous lives, family structure, and communities revolve around fishing. And in some of the communities, I've heard people say things like, if we don't fish, the elders don't eat. And so there's really a critical food security issue that exists in many of the communities along the Fraser that all revolve around salmon. And I think we, as Western scientists who are working on the Fraser River, really have a special obligation when it comes to understanding the river and understanding the culture around the river, because the salmon and the river are not ours. And so I think that means we need to approach science in the Fraser a little differently than we might in many parts of the world. So it's into that context that the Big Bar landslide occurred on June 23rd in 2019. A rock slide was reported in the Fraser River near Big Bar in British Columbia that blocked the river to salmon migration. I think as probably everybody on the call probably already knows, salmon are born and reared in rivers, and then they go out to the ocean for 2 to 3 years, and then they return to their ancestral spawning grounds in order to, have their kids. Salmon are really iconic animals on the west coast of North America, so that blockage at Big Bar was a big deal. And it didn't just risk salmon, but it really risked the entire way of life in the Fraser. And so, once the landslide was discovered, it was recognized that there was some immediate action necessary. It was then recognized there was really a risk of extinction of salmon in the upper part of the basin if some action was not taken. That was confirmed when people started measuring the mortality of salmon and realizing that the early run salmon that were trying to cross the landslide at high flow, their mortality rate was pretty close to 100%. There was then an initial contract that was issued by the federal government to clear the landslide. That was $52 million. And then there was a subsequent contract issued for $176 million that was intended to correct the problem at Big Bar. The initial response to the Big Bar landslide was chaotic. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans normally focuses on oceanography and fisheries enforcement, but they were tasked in this case with what is the largest and most expensive emergency river restoration project that has ever been undertaken in the history of Canada. And so it's understandable that that initial response was a little chaotic. And that response involved, visits from politicians, hundreds of people working on the ground, helicopter and truck transport of fish up around the landslide. It involved building roads where no roads had existed prior to the landslide. And then it involved at one point a salmon cannon that was shooting salmon through the air. That's always a great example of Canadian ingenuity when I tell these stories around the world, is to say, oh, at one point they were trying to shoot salmon over the landslide. Now, I wasn't involved in the initial Big Bar landslide response, but I was watching from Vancouver, and what I saw made me a little bit nervous. And the reason why what I was seeing made me nervous is because I knew a few things that I didn't feel like I didn't see them being talked about in the context of the landslide. And those things included the fact that, the landslide came as a surprise to people. But, as someone who studies rivers and landslides, my thinking was, well, there's no reason why it should have been a surprise, because in mountainous terrains, landslides happen basically everywhere all the time. It is how landscapes evolve over long time periods. And so, I kind of recognized that people did not recognize the risk that was associated with having a big river flow through a rocky landscape. The other thing I recognized that I don't think a lot of people were talking about was that there are a lot of canyons in the Fraser River that have morphology and geology that is very, very similar to what existed at Big Bar. And so that means there's a lot of places in the Fraser where a blockage could occur, and I didn't think there were many people who quite recognized that. Um, and then the last thing that I recognized, the last thing that was concerning me when I was watching the response from Vancouver, was that there's really a lot of places in the Fraser River where there's very fast velocities in the river. So very fast, the river is moving very, very quickly. And if I looked at what the flow looked like at Big Bar that the fish were trying to migrate through, I could identify at least 3 or 4 other places where it had very similar flows, and so that made me a little nervous as well. Um, but so while that emergency response was underway, I started putting together a team of scientists to study the environmental impacts of the Big Bar landslide. That group involved people from more than 10 universities and some people that were already involved with the response from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. Um, and then we started a collaboration with the Hakai Institute, who is an independent organization that is mostly focused on coastal and ocean monitoring. But they recognize that there's this direct connection between what's happening in the ocean and happening in the river. And so then they got involved with our group to try to start collecting information to make those assessments of the impact of the Big Bar landslide. And of course, Kim Benunos and Greg Witzke started helping us build collaborations with First Nations. And that has been one of the great joys of the work that we've done on the Fraser landslides, in that we have begun to build a group that continues to expand. And there are new collaborations that continue to emerge with our First Nation collaborators. That group of people collectively wrote a proposal in 2020 to the British Columbia Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund. That study got funded in 2021. And the idea was there was 3 things that we were going to focus on in that study. The first was trying to understand the past impacts of landslides on salmon populations. The second was to try to understand the impact of the landslide, the Big Bar landslide, on the physical, biological, and genetic makeup of Fraser salmon. And then the last part of it was to try to start looking forward and thinking about the future, and trying to assess the potential for future landslides in the Fraser. And that's really what we're going to try to continue to talk about today. So I'd like to shift a little bit and start talking about what happened at the Big Bar landslide. So although the rock slide was first reported on June 23rd, 2019, satellite imagery shows that it actually happened between October 31st and November 2nd. So we say the landslide happened on November 1st, 2018. If you do the math there, what you recognize is that the landslide was in the river and affecting the river for about 8 months before it got reported to government organizations. And it really only happened when locals realized the salmon couldn't navigate the landslide, and they started pooling downstream. At which point then the response, or the media got involved, and then the response began. So what actually happened at Big Bar was approximately 90,000 cubic meters of rock failed off a cliff face into the river. By the standard of landslides, or considering the landslides that have happened in the Fraser Basin in the past, it's a relatively small rockfall, but it happened in a very narrow constriction of the river, and that is why it posed a problem. The debris that came from the rock slide dammed the river for about 7 hours, and then it caused a 7-meter high wall of water that flowed over that debris. And it's important to recognize that it was not the landslide itself that was blocking the river to upstream fish migration, but what happened is the material that came off of the hill slope, off of the cliff face there, when it went into the river, what it did is it changed the flow at the in that canyon. And then it made the speed of the river much too fast for salmon to swim upstream again. So it's not necessarily like it was a blockage like we had in the Chilcotin River where it fully blocked the river. It was that rock went into the river and then changed the flow patterns and created something that we call a hydraulic barrier to salmon migration. And that just means that the flow is going too fast for salmon to migrate upstream past. So it turns out that salmon can swim upstream at about 5 to 8 meters per second, depending on the size and the species. And rivers very rarely flow faster than about 2 meters per second. So salmon normally have no trouble swimming upstream, even through the Fraser Canyon. But what happened is the landslide changed the flow so that it was much, much too fast for salmon to navigate. This is the speed of the Fraser River at the Big Bar landslide that our group was able to measure using drones. And so we fly a drone over top of the river, and then we measure how fast the river is going from video that we collect. And so if you look at this diagram here, what you can see is there's a whole bunch of maps uh, of the speed of the river for different discharges. And if you look, you can see that the yellow is low river speed. And then when you get kind of the reddish and purple colors, that's where the river is moving very fast. And so it's the where the river has a high speed. And if you look at these diagrams, you can see why fish couldn't migrate upstream past the landslide by looking at the river speeds. So at low flow, the river speed was below the speed at which salmon can migrate upstream at, meaning it was below 5 to 8 meters per second. But as the discharge increases, the area of high speed zones, the area of the river channel that is red, expanded at the expense of low velocity zones. And so that's interesting because it tells us that, that's interesting because it gives us a reason why salmon weren't able to migrate through, but it also suggests to us that the salmon should have been able to migrate past the Big Bar landslide at low flows. And in fact, we found that is in fact true, that below a particular discharge, salmon could get past the landslide if they really struggled, but then above a certain discharge, they were not able to do that. They were not able to migrate upstream. So that discharge dependence of the barrier at Big Bar is reflected in the populations that were affected. So if you were a salmon that tried to cross the landslide in July or early August of 2019, that's at relatively high discharges. The survival rate of those populations was between 1 and about 30%. And so the early Stewart, the Bowron, and the Seco were all impacted by the landslide because they were trying to cross the landslide at high flow. Those populations that were trying to cross the landslide at more moderate discharges had a better survival rate. So 50% of the Nadina salmon population was able to pass. And then as we went to even lower flows in mid-August through September at relatively low discharges, the survival rates went up quite substantially, so up to about 80%. So, the late Stewart, Sulaco, the Quesnel, and the Chilco had about 80% survival rates. So, I mean, the fact the landslide was there impacted populations. It, of course, would have been better if there was no landslide for salmon survival rates back to their spawning grounds. But at low flow, the landslide did not present the same barrier as it did at high flow. There's a number of important lessons that we learned from our work on the Big Bar landslide. The first is that a relatively small landslide in a canyon can block salmon migration. Another thing we learned is that a river doesn't necessarily have to be completely blocked for a barrier to salmon migration to occur. That you can have rock go into the river that then alters the patterns of flow, and then those patterns of flow turn out to block salmon because they can't swim fast enough to get through the flow. We found that barriers are discharge dependent. And the last thing, one of the conclusions we came to from what we saw at Big Bar is really the canyons need to be monitored for future landslides, particularly in remote areas. If we had known that the landslide was in the river 8 months before, there's a lot more work that could have been done um, to try to make adjustments to the landslide so it didn't impact fisheries. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and so I'm going to start talking about our hunt for past landslides in the Fraser Basin. One of the things that we wanted to figure out once we understood how big an impact the Big Bar landslide had is we then wanted to think a little bit about, okay, well, have there been other big landslides that have blocked the Fraser River or impacted salmon fisheries? And it turns out there is a history of river blocking landslides in the Fraser River. So this is Hell's Gate. It is one of the narrowest parts of the Fraser River. In 1913, during the construction of the CN Railway, there was a great amount of construction debris that was thrown into the river, and it began to cause a hydraulic barrier to salmon in 1913. And then on February 10th in 1914, about an 80,000 cubic meter rock slide occurred that made that initial hydraulic barrier that was caused by the construction debris. It made it an acute barrier, and so the fish could no longer pass. What it did was it created a 5 meter high overfall in Hell's Gate, which was then reduced to about 3 meters high by blasting the rock. And so that is more or less what happened at Big Bar as well, right? We have a narrow constriction in a canyon. We have a rock, a landslide that contributed a bunch of rock into the river, and then it changed the flow to create this almost waterfall-like structure. And then the flow velocities were too fast for the salmon to get past. So, this is almost the exact same thing that happened at the Big Bar landslide. So if the Big Bar landslide and what happened at Hell's Gate doesn't scare you a little bit, then this should. So about 2,300 years ago, there was a landslide that happened near Texas Creek. That's between Lytton and Lillooet. And that landslide was absolutely enormous. It was 500 times the size of the landslide that happened at Big Bar and at Hell's Gate. It created a 50-meter high dam in the river and then created a lake that extended right from Texas Creek all the way upstream, almost to Lillooet, 15 kilometers. It's very likely that no fish could pass that landslide for many years, or perhaps even decades. It might even be a century that fish couldn't pass through there before the rock was entirely cleared. So you can imagine the ecological change that likely happened due to that landslide when fish couldn't get upstream. And it turns out that some archaeologists think that this caused the widespread abandonment of indigenous villages in the basin, because indigenous groups were so heavily dependent on fish migration for food. Although I will note that there are some people who disagree with that idea. But so nevertheless, this is a huge event in the history of the river, and probably meant that there weren't many salmon getting upstream, or no salmon getting upstream in the Fraser Basin for a long period of time. So, recognizing that the Texas Creek landslide happened, the Big Bar and the Hell's Gate landslides that had occurred, really encouraged our group to start hunting for the next landslide. And the way that we did that is we linked up with the Hakai Institute. They have an airborne coastal observatory where they're able to collect topographic information of the Earth's surface using a technique called LIDAR. And so that basically maps out the topography of the Earth's surface and allows us to start looking for landslides in that data. We also worked with them to collect bathymetric information, so tried to figure out what the bottom of the river looked like. And in particular, we were focused on trying to find places where the banks of the river might be eroding, because of course that would contribute to a landslide. If you start eroding the bank of a river where you have a lot of rock up above it, well, that rock can fail down into the river and block it. And then in those places where we thought another landslide was possible, or we thought a landslide might be likely, we started going out and doing drone surveys. And so we would take a drone and we'd be able to fly it over the banks of the river and rock, and then measure the topography from the information that we collect with that drone. So we really used kind of a whole suite of techniques to map out what the Earth's surface looked like in those places where we thought a landslide was possible. Aaron Steelquist from Stanford University was part of our team, and he built an inventory of landslide events that happened in the Fraser Canyon corridor from Yale up to Soda Creek. And so what he found was that there's about 279 past landslides that have happened in the last 15,000 years. One of the things that he found was that those landslides were not clustered in time. So, those 279 landslide events, they didn't all happen right when the landscape deglaciated, right after glaciers melted at the end of the last ice age. But they also didn't happen like 300 years ago. They're kind of spread out unevenly through time. And that's really an important finding of our work, because it means that we should be expecting landslides of any size to occur at any time in the Fraser. And so that's a reason for us to really keep our eyes on what's going on in the river. So some of the lessons that we learned from our hunt for past landslides is that, first of all, there are many, many landslides that have occurred in the past in the Fraser Canyon. Thankfully, most of them are not large enough or close enough to the river to affect salmon migration, but there are some that can have impacts on salmon migration. And of course, we have the three that we know most about: Big Bar, Hell's Gate, and Texas Creek. And then the last thing we learned from our hunt for past landslides is that we really should be expecting the next landslide to happen at any time. And so we need to prepare for that eventuality. Okay, so I want to again shift gears and talk a little bit about predicting the future, right? Trying to find places in the Fraser that are susceptible to landslides, so we can begin, monitoring and preparing for them. So we are still very much working on predicting where landslides might occur. A graduate student with me and Sergio Sepulveda at Simon Fraser, named Hao-Yu Wang, has been using machine learning algorithms. That's a type of artificial intelligence to predict where landslides might happen in the future. What this type of analysis tells us is those places in the landscape where future landslides are most likely to occur. And I've shown here a group of maps that Hao-Yu made, where the red colors on that map are places where landslides are likely to happen, and the yellow areas are places where they're unlikely to happen. And you can see there's quite a lot of red, which is a little bit concerning to us. This kind of approach to mapping landslide susceptibility is really at the research frontier. It's not really ready for regular application to sort of do emergency planning and those kinds of things. So recognizing the challenges in applying these research grade solutions to practical problems, we decided, as part of the BC Shrift project, to try to identify places where a landslide would block salmon migration in the Fraser Canyon. And we did it on kind of subjective criteria that we developed ourselves. So we started looking in the Fraser Canyon for places that were like Big Bar. So we started looking for places where the channel was laterally constricted by bedrock. We looked for places where there was some evidence that the riverbanks, the rock riverbanks, were being eroded. We started looking for places where the channel had lots of steep rock banks or cliffs up above the river, because if you have lots and lots of steep rock and cliffs, it's a good source for those rocks that can then fall into the river and cause problems. And then we also look for places where the rock was fractured in a manner that would produce really massive immobile blocks of rock in the river, like we saw at Big Bar. So we went and we looked for those subjective criteria that we developed, and tried to go along the river and identify places where those four things came together to make us as geologists and geoscientists nervous about whether there would be another landslide. So so then we wrote a report on this that is available to the public, where we defined 13 sites of concern for future landslides along the Fraser Canyon corridor. And so those are 13 distinct locations. And then there are two long reaches of the river we think are particularly susceptible to landslides that would block salmon migration. And those locations are just up north of Lillooet, and the other location is the other what we call reach of concern is from Boston Bar down to Yale, British Columbia. If you're, sorry, before I move on here, if you're interested in seeing the report, you can see I have one of those fancy little stamps right there that you can click on with your phone to go to see the report, or I have a link to the report down at the bottom of the slide there. And I believe these, if they have not already, that they'll be distributed by Tasha, so you'll have the link. You don't need to write it down or take a picture of this. You can do that later if you want to see that report. And if you want to know where these sites of concern are in relation to indigenous traditional territories, we've done some of that work for you, and we've laid the traditional territories out with the sites of concern laid out on top of them, so you can see where those sites are in relation to your traditional territories. So just to go through some of those sites of concern, some of these might be familiar with you. So when we were putting together these sites of concern, we thought, well, there's no reason why we couldn't have another landslide or another rockfall at Big Bar. That could be a problem. And so some of the sites would be familiar to you because they're places where we've had landslides in the past. So the Big Bar, French Bar Canyon, where the Big Bar landslide happened, that is one of our sites of concern. We then have Texas Creek, right? That's where the really big landslide happened. We can see evidence that there's rock moving there right now, and so that's a site of concern for us. And then, of course, Hell's Gate. The conditions that produced the blockage at Hell's Gate in 1914, they still exist at that site. Some of these sites of concern might be familiar to you, but the risk is not yet realized. So High Bar Canyon, which is right downstream of Big Bar, it's about 10 kilometers downstream or something like that. It has the exact same geology, the exact same morphology that exists at Big Bar. And so it's very likely that at some point in the future, there's going to be a Big Bar-like event and High Bar Canyon. Fountain Canyon, just upstream of Lillooet, also has concerning characteristics to it, mainly because it's a super narrow part of the Fraser River, and so even a small rock slide could block the river to salmon migration. And then, down near Yale, British Columbia, there's a place that we call Dry Rack Canyon, primarily because there's dry racks all over the hill slope there. where we can see, the rock is actively failing, and it's a very narrow part of the river that could be blocked to salmon migration with a moderate or small rockfall. And then there's a bunch of the sites, the rest of the sites are probably unfamiliar to a lot of you. So, if we go up towards Soda Creek, there's a place called Chimney Creek Canyon, where there's just an enormous amount of rock that a huge cliff face that sits up over the river, and a small rock slide there, if it came down into that canyon, could cause a problem. There's a place called Iron Canyon that we are concerned about. And again, it's because the river is narrowly constricted and there's a lot of rock up high that can fail into it. And then there's places that might be unfamiliar to you. There's a place called Black Canyon. It is right downstream of Hell's Gate, and it basically has the same morphology and the same geology that Hell's Gate does. And so there's no reason why we wouldn't expect a rock fall there that could potentially block the river. And then, of course, there's 4 other ones I'm not showing you here, just in the interest of time. But you can look more into it by looking at our report on that. So if you're interested in digging deeper into these sites of concern, we tried to democratize the data to make sure that everybody had access to the information that we were looking at. We've collated all that data that we use to look at those sites of concern into a web portal, WebGIS. And so the link you can see down there on the left-hand side will take you to the web portal, so you can see what kind of information we as geoscientists were looking at that made these sites of concern. And then we also, the Hikai Institute built an interactive tool that we intended mainly for First Nations organizations to use, that allows you to see which populations of salmon would be impacted by an event at one of these sites of concern. So you can go and you can click on a particular site of concern, and then it will tell you all of the salmon runs that would be blocked if there was an event at one of those locations. And again, Natasha will distribute the links there, so you'll be able to look at those another time. Okay, so I'm going to try to wrap things up here by just saying a few words about things that we can do to start preparing for that next landslide. So the main thing that we can do is we can start watching for environmental change. The landslides that have happened in the Chilcotin River and at Big Bar, they have come as surprises. But from the perspective of a geoscientist, there's really no reason why they should have been surprises. The characteristics of the landscape of those places would tell us that a landslide is likely to happen at those places. And so the reason why the Big Bar landslide and the Chilcotin landslide were surprises to everyone is that really there was nobody looking at these places where landslides are likely to happen. And so we need to start watching the Fraser and start watching those places that we think are likely, watching those places where a landslide is likely to happen in the future. I think another thing we need to do is we need to recognize the risk that is posed by landslides. Of course, we're reminded when the Big Bar landslide happened that landslides pose a risk to salmon populations. And of course, we saw what happened at the Chilcotin River. But we need to recognize that the risk exists, that it doesn't go away by not looking. And so we need to pay attention. And the other thing I think is really important to recognize is, you don't need a PhD to know when a rock is going to fall in the river, right? And so, we should really be watching collectively for what's going on in the river and making sure that we have the opportunity to record what's happening and then report things back to others. And the other thing that we need to do after we recognize the risk is we need to start monitoring the river. And so, we've made a little bit of progress on this front. In 2015, we started working with Gerald Mitchell, often called Bobo, from the Houston First Nation. And we got talking to him, and he told us at one of our sites of concern that in fact there was movement happening there, And so then he took us and introduced us to the rancher across from White Canyon, one of our sites of concern. We went out and I brought Sergio Sepulveda, who's an internationally recognized landslide expert. Um, and the rancher explained to us that there has been rock slides happening at one of our sites of concern for the past 80 years, some of them very large. Um, and it allows us to really learn from people who know the landscape best. And so we'd like to continue to do that. So, one of the things that we can do collectively is that you can start watching the river and start pointing us in the direction of places where we need to really focus our attention to try to understand the landslide risk. The other thing that we need to do is I think we need to collectively advocate for a monitoring program for the river because, we can't do science if we don't have any money. We can go out, we can make connections with First Nations and organizations and talk to ranchers and whatnot. But if we really want to get into monitoring things, that costs money. We need to be aware of that. So the biggest hurdle that we face right now to making progress on assessing the risk and looking for those landslides is that there's no real central place to store information about the Fraser River. So, if you collect information and you see some rock moving around, I mean, you can give me a call and I'll try to come and look at it. But, what do you really do with the information that you collect? The data that is needed for management of the risk and emergency planning in the Fraser River, it really has not been democratized. It's not available to everybody, and I think that's a problem. And so if there is another landslide, there's really not any capacity for people like me to get involved and go out and do the kinds of things that we did at Big Bar. And so I think that points in the direction of us needing to develop a science monitoring center. And I would argue that a science monitoring center focused on looking at the Fraser and would be able to assemble, store, and centralize data so that, the same information that the, DFO has available to them becomes available to First Nations organizations and to scientists. I think having a monitoring center would allow us to build baseline data sets and to monitor the physical and biological health of the river. And then it could include things like technical training for Indigenous communities to collect and analyze information at places like the sites of concern. We could do research to meet stakeholder needs. And I think really it would put us in a better position for emergency readiness so that for the next landslide that happens, a science monitoring center could be there to provide the information necessary to respond to it. And I really do think that if we were going to move forward with something like this, there would have to be a collaboration between First Nations governments, non-governmental organizations like the Hakai Institute, and maybe include people like me from universities. Okay, well, thanks very much for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions either now or during the discussion period.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Yeah, every time this is a really complex issue, and every time I've seen this presentation a few times in different ways, and every time I do, I learn a lot of new things, and I'm constantly sort of shocked and surprised at how at the magnitude of the issue and the research that's been done. We do have a couple of minutes, so Jeremy is super great at being on time, and we do have a couple of minutes. So if anybody has any technical questions that you want to ask now, either raise your hand and I'll come to you, or if you could put your question in the chat. Then we can take a couple of minutes before I go to the video. Just give people a minute to think of their questions. Okay, well, I know that questions will come to you. This is a complex topic and there's going to be lots to discuss. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and share. We have a fantastic.
I have a question.
Okay, I'm hearing
Denise
a
answered,
couple.
I don't know where to put my hand up on it. But
Okay.
we were involved in helping with one of these sites. And one of the sites where we set up like a weather station camera, and they did like gathering information through drones, uh, and all the information for the landslide, like the movement of the rocks and the water, like how much water is going through, or like the rainfall events. But we never did receive any of the information back. Is there some sort of agreement that needs to be made for data sharing for us to be able to get the information back? And that was on the fountain site. It's above the little airport. Fountain is on the other side of the mountain, but it's called the fountain site.
Mhm. Yeah, I can address that. I don't think that. So one of the part of my argument, I think that for why we need a monitoring center is because um, so you have worked with some group, but it wasn't our group, and so we don't have any idea what really was done, where that information is, and so you know, what winds up happening is information like you just talked about gets collected by a particular group, and it's never contributed back to some sort of central database or some central organization. And so then there's lots of those little initiatives that have happened all over the place, um, and we I like so I wouldn't know where that information is either, and we didn't have anything to do with it so far as I know. It becomes kind of another argument for why one would need this, right? Why one needs to have a coordinated monitoring center where information like the information you've mentioned can be centrally stored and shared back with the organizations that supported the collection of that information to begin with.
Yeah, what's your SFU?
Oh, well,
Maybe
it,
we can connect you via email and yeah. So sounds like thanks for your question, Denise. Sounds like you and Jeremy probably need to connect.
yeah, and well, this is kind of characteristic of things as well, right? I mean, I'm not the only person at SFU. There's many people at SFU, and so we don't all necessarily know what each other's doing. So I'd be very interested in hearing what information was collected. I'd appreciate that connection, Kim.
Super. So there's a question. I see a hand up, but we'll just go to one question in the chat before we go to Michelle, and then I'll have to take it over to the video, but we'll come back to the discussion for sure. So Alex Bevington, hi Alex. Any sense of technological options for monitoring these slopes? Pros and cons, thinking of repeat LiDAR, satellite monitoring, sensing, INSAR, etc., seismic monitoring or cameras or inclinometers. What sort of network would you advocate for?
Um, Well, to be honest, I think a combination of all of those things. I think monitoring landslides and monitoring the risk associated with landslides is very much kind of at the forefront of research. The kinds of things that we did while we were doing the BC Shrift project is we would do repeat LiDAR. That was quite helpful because then we could see whether anything was moving on the hill slope. Um, but Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of interesting technologies that we can use. We can install seismometers, the same instruments that are used to look for earthquakes or to monitor earthquakes. You can use, I think, as you mentioned, INSAR radar information. I think because these are discrete locations that we're looking at, probably the best place to start would be to start putting some cameras out to look at the hill slopes and then watching them for change. And then places where there's some change detected, you could then go and you could use other technologies to try to monitor them. But yeah, so we're kind of at the stage now where there's aside from visual observations of people who visit the sites, there's really no monitoring going on at all. And so the way you'd want to implement a monitoring program is sort of gradually add pieces of instrumentation and monitoring technologies to see what works most effectively, and then building up a network that could include all of the things that you just listed.
Well, thanks, Jeremy. All right, and last question before we go to the video, and I know there are a couple that are in the chat, and if you all, we'll come back to your comments and questions in our discussion portion of the morning. But first, Michelle Edwards from Statlium, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, kind of for everybody. Thanks, Jeremy, for the presentation. But it's more about who to report, like something that if fish are stranded or if they're having trouble. It's who should be the first call, because I think when the Big Bar slide happened, the fish were stranded at the fish ladder in Bridge River, and that should have actually been our first indicator that something just happened upstream. Those fish never should have been stranded like that, but we went out and put them back in the river. But I don't know that anybody thought at the time to think, there must have been a slide just upstream from here, and for whatever reason, the water went up, came down, and stranded the salmon. So I think for when we have a group like this, that's a discussion that we also need to have is what is it that we plan to do? Who should be the first call for everybody just to go and look at the river, maybe at some of these sites. I don't know how that site, if it was on anybody's radar at any time, but even my brother-in-law lived right there. And he didn't know, I think maybe until the spring, until he started hearing. It's like, hey, why am I hearing, the water where before he wasn't hearing it? So I think that's something that we need to look at is who should be our first call to go and look at something like that, because it'll be the locals and the salmon that will be our first indicator. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that.
Yeah, and I can. I'm certainly no expert on who to report things to, but I can address it in some ways. I think Greg Witzke might be able to say more about this, but there's really the group of people who oversaw the activities at Big Bar included provincial government, federal government, and First Nations, and it seems to me that that formed a network that should be turned into a reporting structure, right? So that there becomes some organization that then can accept information like what you're talking about, Michelle. And so that, if there is another landslide, there's a public-facing website or something where people can go to, and then that activates that network. So that would be kind of the way I would think would be best to do it. I would like to hear if somebody sees something, but there's nothing I can do about it, right? And I know there's reluctance to go directly to DFO about things, that are happening in people's traditional territories. But so an independent organization built on that group that oversaw the Big Bar landslide makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to go ahead and share the video. So this is a video called Saving the Fraser Salmon Migration. And this is a video that was developed by our partner, the Hakai Institute, who brought both data and a bunch of expertise to the project. And it's a beautiful video. Sorry, I'm not. Here we go.
In the wilds of British Columbia, there's one river that stands out from the rest. Over millions of years, the Fraser River has shaped much of the surrounding landscape as it bore into bedrock, carving its path from the Rocky Mountains all the way to the ocean. It's where millions of salmon famously come each year to spawn in one of nature's most impressive migrations, with salmon defying the odds and even gravity to return to their birthplace. But this migration has narrow margins, and just one landslide in the wrong place could threaten the entire salmon population, which local indigenous communities rely on. So researchers have spent the last 2 years studying the most vulnerable areas of the Fraser in the hopes of preventing future catastrophes. But can they actually learn to predict where the next landslides will strike?
I grew up fishing in the Fraser River in Lillooet, so I have firsthand experience on how important fish are to the foundation of our culture there. In recent memory, the human caused the Hell's Gate slide. It totally blocked salmon access for everyone upstream. At that time, indigenous peoples were carrying salmon on their backs in baskets of water, helping put salmon into carts with horses leading them, bringing them around the slide, getting them upstream to keep the runs viable. You know, it took from 1914 to 1937 to start work on fixing that major slide. That's a long duration to be without salmon going upstream. With no fish to catch, we can't pass on our culture to the next generation. Never mind for generations to come, as our ancestors expect us to do.
Still untamed by dams, the 1,300 kilometers of the Fraser River are the lifeblood of British Columbia, and salmon are a big part of that. Not only do the salmon use this river as their spawning beds, but even their carcasses are a vital part of the food chain, providing nutrients to nearly all life here.
When they die and their carcasses are rotting, the predators, bears, eagles, foxes, anything will come and eat that, and they will even drag that up into the forest where the trees, moss, everything can then incorporate all of those building blocks into their tissues.
Salmon are a hugely important part of the life cycle here, but when that cycle gets disrupted, it's not pretty. That's what happened in 2019 at a canyon near Big Bar, when over 100,000 cubic meters of rock came crumbling down into the river at a particularly narrow section of the Fraser, temporarily blocking the river and trapping all the salmon below the slide, threatening to wipe out the entire Fraser and nearby Thompson salmon river runs. Luckily, it just so happened that Hackai's Airborne Coastal Observatory, a plane with a payload of cameras and LiDAR scanners, had already been flying over the area, imaging the landscape from the air. So when the team heard of the Big Bar landslide, they reacted quickly to scan the damage.
You know, at the time, it was quite a quick decision, but in retrospect, it was a really important one. Because we call it perishable data, so data that may change quickly over days or weeks following an event. Because we had the advantage of having pre-slide data, we were able to compare data sets and actually measure and quantify how much material failed and went into the river. I think for us it was the beginning of this sort of nimble approach to responsive surveying.
In the years since, the Canadian government has spent more than $50 million on infrastructure to get the salmon past this massive barrier, even going so far as to try to blow away the debris and implement a fish wheel. Researchers hope that by anticipating future landslides, we can proactively avoid similar catastrophes.
So if you know where those things are likely to happen, and you know how to get in there, and you have a plan to deal with them, it's relatively easy to go in and make a plan for blasting rock out of the way.
But predicting where a landslide will occur isn't easy. To come up with some real solutions, Jeremy needed more than just landslide experts. So he gathered a diverse team of researchers together, studying everything from salmon biology and genetics to river morphology and riverbanks. As part of a multi-year project, they've been working alongside Fisheries and Oceans Canada, as well as local councils and First Nations with a wealth of Indigenous knowledge to study the impact of landslides on salmon migration. Over the years, they've also created a map of some of the most vulnerable parts of the Fraser, outlining 13 areas of particular concern. Now, everyone is convened here on the Fraser River, and over the next 3 days, they'll float from Soda Creek to Yale, studying these areas of concern in person to get a feel for how imminent the failures might be.
And that is places where we find the river is very narrowly confined, where the water is already moving very fast, and that if there was a landslide or a failure of some type, it would go into the channel and potentially block the channel.
Blocking the channel isn't the only way a landslide can spell disaster. If a landslide were to create a new rapid by adding debris to the channel, even that could have a huge impact on the salmon's ability to migrate past, causing the fish to expend huge amounts of energy. Researchers call these places hydraulic barriers. A barrier could also arise if the river gradient suddenly increases upstream, what they call an overfall step, or when the river suddenly becomes narrow, accelerating the flow of water through that constriction. But how do researchers know that these hydraulic barriers are actually an issue for the fish? Well, they can track the energy the fish are expending using radiometry tags. This antenna on the boat shows where the fish are in the water. They've been tracking the salmon's movements to see if they're stuck in one place, trying to get past a barrier. And while the river experts are looking down into the water, the geomorphologists are looking up. As the Fraser River continues to carve out the landscape, it threatens to eat away at the supports of these massive valley walls.
Some of these landslides can occur along river systems as rivers incise into or cut the toe of the landslide itself. That can destabilize the material and cause failure.
While this is a natural phenomena, studies have shown that these types of landslides have increased due to climate change because of high precipitation events like the 2 atmospheric rivers that drowned British Columbia in November of 2021. So finding these vulnerable areas is crucial. Fortunately, these researchers have had some help from the sky. With Hakkai's Airborne Coastal Observatory flying above to get aerial LiDAR imagery, they can strip away the trees to reveal past and existing failures, which is how the team was able to home in on those 13 most vulnerable areas.
So there's kind of some classic signs that you can see in a landscape where you get kind of a half-moon-shaped scar in the valley wall. Would give you an idea that maybe material has slid out from that location. That, and then the pile of debris that from the landslide itself, and seeing if we can start to get an idea of how frequently, or at least how many landslides have happened here in the past.
Next, they're working to find out when those landslides happened. But how they do that gets a little complicated, and it starts way out in space. The Earth is constantly being bombarded with cosmic rays coming from the sun as a result of supernova explosions in space. These cosmic rays can only penetrate to a certain depth on the Earth's surface. So by measuring chemical changes in the rock caused by the exposure to these rays, researchers can estimate when the landslide occurred. By getting a timeline for landslides in the Fraser Canyon, researchers can then look at how fish have evolved over time to see if these events have had an impact on the genetic diversity of salmon. Greater genetic variation means salmon are more resilient to environmental disturbances and disease. So slides can have less obvious but no less important long-term consequences on fish populations. Having all these experts from various fields, river dynamics, landslides, fish biology, genetics, sitting shoulder to shoulder in the boats looking at the subject of their studies in person, it allows for some unique table talk.
And a lot of times science seems to be very balkanized. So folks in geology are doing geology things, like biologists are doing biology things. But really, you know, all living things are living on planet Earth. And so there is going to be some kind of connection between geology and what the landscape looks like and what's actually happening to ecosystems on it.
By engaging with the many First Nations on the Fraser, each with a different experience of the river and the salmon on it, we begin to weave together our understanding of just what the impact of one landslide could be. The team will continue to study why these landslides occur and how a landslide like Big Bar impacts the salmon population. With that knowledge and the understanding of where the most vulnerable areas on the Fraser are, planning teams will be able to develop informed emergency plans focused on the high hazard areas for the next landslide. And there will be a next landslide. The bare earth is constantly changing, and there's perhaps no better example of this than a mighty river like the Fraser, which will continue to shape the landscape for millennia to come. The question is, can one of our most precious and valuable creatures here in BC survive the river's twists and turns? Thanks to the help of local First Nations, community stewards, and a raft of scientific experts, the salmon just might have a chance.
Great. So as I said, we'll share the link to that video. I hope you enjoyed that. And I will go back to our slides. Sorry, lose my place in my slides. We just have a few words about sort of the reciprocal sharing, information sharing, and engagement that that took place throughout the project. And I'm going to invite Greg Witzke to join me in sharing some thoughts about this. So just to start with, so the Fraser Basin Council began working alongside Jeremy and others to develop a proposal to the BC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund. And we realized, so Fraser Basin Council, our role here was really to sort of engage with the nations or create an opportunity to gather what knowledge or information was available and where the nations were willing to share, but we knew that we needed to do that through a liaison, so somebody who is can help advise us on protocols and then support sort of knowledge and sort of a practice building alongside researchers. And Greg, it was just such a pleasure to work with Greg closely on doing that. The way that we engaged and shared information was through things like newsletters, email chains, online workshop or online discussions. We held a workshop in the first year in Lillooet where the team of researchers, many of whom were, early careers, still learning through their process, to share information. We had some discussion at that workshop. We learned a bit about what folks were going to be looking for, what fisheries managers and what the nations might be looking for in terms of information, and then followed that up with a couple of other workshops with just the researchers. And then in the final year of the project, we held our last workshop in Hope in February 2024, home of Chawathil First Nation, where Jeremy and the sort of the team of researchers shared their results, and then we did have a bit of discussion about what was needed, what was sort of seen as the next steps there. And I'm going to invite Greg to share some thoughts there.
Yeah, good job. Thank you, Tim. That was very interesting project over 3 years, and then there was a lot of relationships formed between academia and the local Indigenous communities, and that's paramount to growing the trust. We all know DFO struggles to do this. There's very little trust in the Fraser Canyon of DFO. Jeremy here, he's been a leader in these activities to build relationships, and he's formed some personal connections with local fisheries community champions. I've seen Jeremy's seen me in Lillooet there in passing, and so I know he's just drops in from time to time, and he's there. I know we need to collaborate and advocate for a center, and I heard my name mentioned by Jeremy that the FSMC, Fraser Salmon Management Council, is in a good position to be a communications portal. We do have 80 First Nations communities in the Fraser River Basin mandated with giving us a voice to speak for them. But the problem is we lack staff capacity and funding to actually be a lead contact for the reporting of any landslide activities. So any advocation from partner groups who want to see a monitoring center built needs to come as a collaborative body, bringing forward that lobby effort to the government, or to maybe some fundraising organizations that could help us have adequate capacity to man a phone so somebody answers it. We can all look at a website, click on a link, but picking up a phone and having somebody answer on the other end is what we really want to see, I believe, in a monitoring center for to report any activity that could be indicative of a landslide. BFO can't do it, honestly. They've got major cutbacks coming up this April, which we're impacted by in our organization. So kudos to the academia stepping forward and working for 3 years to build relationships. And the next steps will include that growing relationship building and advocacy for some group to take a lead on being a contact, at least at the start, to be able to report any kind of activities. So hopefully I didn't get too off scope there. Rishkooks, that is all for now.
Yeah, thanks very much, Greg. So some of the facilitated dialogue at the workshop in Hope identified the need for a committee to continue the conversation, to determine next steps and source funding. Certainly, Fraser Basin Council was interested in supporting that and working with these project partners. We'll just open up some discussion here. We did have a speaker. I apologize. We did have a speaker to come and share a little bit of perspective, but they were not able to join us today in the end. So we're going to just open it up for some discussion here. So I'll stop sharing and we'll just go back to the discussion. So I just wanted to, there were a number of thoughts that were in the chat prior to the video. So I want to come back to some of those, and I just want to share sort of to guide some of our conversation here. What would the response look like if there were ever another big sparse slide? What would be, some of the questions that folks have asked? What might the environmental impacts be? What are the social, economic, and cultural impacts potentially to that? And I think we've heard a lot about the impacts to salmon. We know that would be the loss of salmon runs would be devastating to nations' cultural expression and nutrition. So what does the response look like, and who is responsible for what actions post-slide? Is there a communications protocol, or does one need to be developed in collaboration with all of the nations and local governments within the First Nation, within the Fraser River Canyon? So a few, any comments, any hands that folks want to share their thoughts or comments with the group at this time? Or I can go back to the chat and see if folks want to bring those questions forward. One of the questions in the chat was from Bonnie Adolf. She asked, are there government funds or grants that we can apply for? Is this group able to build a group that can start to build a program? We have ongoing slides in our community, and we are located between Seton River and Texas Creek. Anybody here have a comment about funding or a process to initiate a group? Greg's nodding.
Yeah, I see Michelle's hand up, so maybe I can wait till Michelle comments.
Michelle, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Yeah. Um, well, I think it's around again the process, and even without a research center or a place to hold information, there's ways that we can probably start planning together on how we would share data, develop a connection team almost. But we have to look at the salmon runs, and Big Bar was. We knew the early Stewart was going to be, a run that was going to be impacted. And I think, and I don't know how you prioritize them, because salmon are important to all of us, right? But sometimes it's, there's going to be an extreme need for us to really push for everybody to get involved. And with Big Bar, when the fisheries minister came to my community at the time and said, just make sure that the funding is available and we can get this job done and we can get salmon through. And even reminding him that, the commercial and the sport industry, the big lobbyists to keep, fishing out there because they have a livelihood and not really a way of life, that they were going to be pushing them too. And I think they would have to be part of this conversation. How would they even make contributions? Because I think they have access to funding that we just wouldn't have access to. And if you look at the budgets that just came out, there's a lot of cutbacks that are happening. And so we're going to have to rely on just ourselves to be able to do this work and just be, always on the lookout for what's going on in the river. Again, we're going to be the first ones to be able to, to tell you that. I mean, I'm not going to put a lot of effort into going to look for slides, but I will put effort into watching what the fish are doing, watching what the wildlife are doing. So everybody's got an expertise that they can bring to the table. And I think we just need to figure out how we do that as a group for the salmon. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Greg, did you want to come back to you were going to comment about funding perhaps?
Yeah, so there is funding. I'm not a funding expert, but the Fraser Basin Council did approach us at the Fraser Sound Management Council to partner in a proposal to start working on a collaborative body. I mentioned it earlier that there's limited capacity at the FSMC to even to do that. We just don't have the staff and to have the time to dedicate to even writing proposals. So I hate to be a doom and gloomer, but that was the fact, and we couldn't move forward with any collaborative proposals with the Fraser Basin Council at that time. I'm sure there's a whole list of other kind of funding agencies, but the big question is a monitoring center. What are we looking at? I don't know, 50 million to build it, and another 150 million a year to maintain it. I'm not sure. So we're talking about some pretty big chunks of cash here. And Michelle's so right. The recreational and commercial fisheries industries, they gotta throw in their share if they want to continue through landslides. Like I'll give an example. When TFO actually left the fisheries open for rec sport fisheries out in the ocean when the landslide happened, when they should have closed those Chinook fisheries so they could get more salmon back to try and get past the slide. But no, they didn't take our advice to close the the rec fishery at the time. But it was just disheartening. That's all I have to say right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Greg. I know we're talking a lot about a monitoring center, and Jeremy's made an amazing, sort of shared a vision for sort of a building that would be, don't know where it might be located. And I imagine, we talk about collaboration. There are many dimensions, I think, in this issue. Anyone care to comment about some of the, beyond just like a building, who might lead a monitoring center or a monitoring program, and what other elements might be needed to address the layers of complexity within the Fraser River and the hazards that present themselves here.
Kim, I could just comment real quick. So on my slide, the building is I typed into an AI image generator, Fraser River Science Monitoring Center, and the building is what it spit back to me. But to be honest, I don't think that's necessarily what we should be thinking about in terms of a monitoring center. That it really has to be a collaboration between different organizations and different groups. And one could imagine that if you were to have a monitoring center for the Fraser Basin, you wouldn't want to have a building in Richmond. You'd probably want to have it as a group of centers, right? So, maybe something in Lillooet, maybe something in Prince George, and something in the Lower Mainland, certainly. But I envision it more as a network than a location, right? And so just to kind of clarify that, and the other thing, I didn't really say this when I gave the presentation, but my perspective, having run the BC Shrift project for 3 years, is that it doesn't really make sense to have a bunch of people going from Vancouver up to monitor the Fraser Basin, right? The monitoring really needs to happen in the communities, and there's a lot that people like me, a researcher, can offer. There's a lot that the Hakai Institute and other organizations can offer. There's a lot that Greg's organization, the Fraser Basin Council, can offer in terms of communications and organization. But it really does have to be a community effort. It does have to be a network. And like I said, there's no real reason why you'd want a bunch of people from Vancouver going up to monitor the basin. That the monitoring should happen in the communities. And so when we start thinking about what the monitoring center might look like, I think it's important not to get locked into the idea that it's like a building in Richmond over which operations are going to go from. We should be really thinking about how it becomes a network. Yeah.
Great. I'd love to hear from others on the call if you have thoughts or comments that you want to share in the chat, or raise your hand.
Hi, it's Denise.
Hi, Denise. Go ahead.
So one of the things that we have academias that come and they do all these projects in the Stallion territory, and it's still kind of like a on the job or job shadowing kind of thing that we participate in, where if we were able to coordinate some sort of say we're going to get credits for something that we're doing, as well as being able to not just be the hole diggers, or and we're able to look at the forms that we're doing and be able to decipher them and figure it out and move forward that way. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise. Some comments in the chat as well. Bonnie's comment about asking about whether there are grants and funds to apply for. And then Jeff Playfair just commented back further, can the Lillooet-based members of this group advocate or partner to develop the research center here? Seems more central than perhaps building it in the lower Fraser Valley. So there's some thoughts there about sort of locations. Bonnie, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Kim. So I think this is about the third meeting, and I just want to thank everybody for their hard work. I live just off of Texas Creek Road. Our community, Suckawash Cayuse Creek Indian Band. I think we've had 3 slides here, one going right across a main road, another one almost are impacting an entire family, just missing the family and the people. And then uncovering an archaeology site during that time. And then, of course, we have the historical slide between Seton and Anderson Lake. Big Bar Slide, obviously right above us. and the Chilcotin slide, which was really, really scary for a community like ours. We were at the mouth of Seton and really worried about the water intakes. I remember standing by myself down at the wells, wondering if we were going to be impacted in our water source. So I've attended, I think, the Teat Kit meeting, the one in Hope, and this one, maybe more, I'm not sure. But I think it's time to take the next step. You know, I agree with everybody here that we know where we live and we know the dangers. I was on a meeting yesterday and explaining that with CN Rail and, or actually the province, discussing we are rural zone 3, and there have been times that we couldn't leave Lillooet, whether it be the 2, 3, 4 slides between here and Lytton, the 10-mile slide, the Duffy Lakes, treacherous and literally a shooting gallery. And so I'm hopeful that the railway will come back into play. But I've watched slides all along the railway all my life as well. So I think at this point, we need to take the next step, and we need funding. And one of my favorite people I see is online. I hope he still is, Trevor Bohay, the director of All Hazard Response. And I'm just wondering if maybe Trevor could assist us in looking at federal or provincial funding, that we can set up a task force within this group to sit down in a room and knock out some proposals. There is a facility here that is a former prawn lab, and it's been on the market for years. I think the price just dropped to 1.1, and there could be several different types of partnerships. As Mid-Fraser, of course, we are very centrally located in BC, and up obviously right on the mile zero of the Fraser River. I think that this partnership, obviously my favorite is the university involvement, and that provincial and federal government and other nations up and down the Fraser, I think, is going to be key to the funding and partnerships amongst each other. But I think that capacity would be all of us working together. But I agree, it's a BC network. It's all of us. And I think we need to move on this sooner than later. And I'm willing to participate at any level, whether it be with the grant writing or whether it be with just a voice, however. But I do have one more question, and all of that, I'm going to point at Trevor Bohay to see if he can help with that. And then I'm just wondering, have there been piezometers installed at the 100+ locations that have been categorized as priority? Thank you all for your hard work. I really appreciate it. And we are sitting ducks here in Lillooet, honestly. There's slides all around us. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bonnie. I don't see Trevor on the call unless I missed you there, Trevor. If you're there and you want to comment or respond, let us know. I think he might have left the call already. But yes, so yeah, I'm just wondering, does anybody have any concerns or any comment about responding to a slide? You know, in terms of disaster mitigation, what kind of response would be gathered if another slide happened? Who would coordinate? Not seeing any comments or questions. Does anybody else have any questions before we sort of come to, we're getting close to the top of the hour.
I can just comment on Bonnie's comment there. I think that you know, this idea, I mean, you can't do this kind of stuff without any money, right? I mean, we can obviously watch the landscape, we can look for landslides, but without any money, you can't really centralize anything, and it's difficult to make any progress. So funding really is a key element of this. But I think, you know, our BC Shrift project ended in 2024. And then I went on sabbatical, partly because I need a little bit of a break. At one point I had like 25 people working in my research group. It was very unusual for a university researcher. And I needed a little break, but I'm back now. I'm not on sabbatical anymore. And I really am looking to try to start building back in the next year or so. And so I think that it is true that governments are cutting back right now, but there are still opportunities out there. And I think what might be interesting is for those who are interested in getting involved in a monitoring program, and I know there's a number of groups around Lillooet and Statlium First Nation and Statlium that are interested in this kind of stuff. And it might be a good idea for us to start getting together and thinking about what kinds of things can be done. Because my experience with the kinds of funding opportunities that open up for these for monitoring is that they open up for 6 weeks or something like that for proposals. So you really kind of have to be ready with an idea of what you'd like to do so that when those opportunities open up, we can really jump on them and do more collaborative science. So it's a good idea to try to get together and start thinking about, okay, what kinds of things do we want to accomplish? What kinds of things we would like to do, so that we're ready for those programs that open up for funding opportunities, whether it be from DFO or I know that the Canada Water Agency has various programs they're trying to run right now. So Bonnie, in terms of what to do next, in terms of moving forward, I think that gathering people together, particularly up in Lillooet, to start having conversations about individual projects we might do while we're thinking about the grander kind of monitoring center that's going to cost a lot more money. It might be a good idea for us to start doing that work.
Thank you, Jeremy.
All right, so a few comments that have come up just in terms of, okay, sorry, before I say what I was about to say, there's just one more comment in the chat here. Terry Robert says the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund program titled Foundations of Disaster Risk Reduction was scheduled for final program release in November 2025 and will be like Category 1 and Category 2 of the previous Disaster Risk Reduction Climate Adaptation funding stream. So this is through the Union of BC Municipalities. Max amount is $150,000 per applicant or proponent, with an application deadline of April 24th, 2026. And from experience, this is a fund that potentially can combine applicants to a larger funding opportunity. So that would probably in one of the roles that FBC has played in another project is as the coordinator and applicant. So as Greg is talking about capacity issues there, and this is so an organization would need to lead that and coordinate if that's something that you're interested in doing. But we can share that information. And that is, yeah, you're right, Terry. That's open to that's open to First Nations or local governments to apply for. And so, yeah, so that's something that's on the horizon. It sounds like, there are a lot of common ideas and interest in combining effort and creating a bit of a network or a committee. There are probably, opportunities to join together in such a network or committee. And one of the opportunities here, of course, is to share this information with others who you think might be interested. So we'll share information at the end of the meeting today. Jeremy has generously made his presentation available that we can share to you along with couple of research papers that have been published about the project and some other resources. Bonnie, I saw your hand come up and then went down. Do you have anything that you'd like to share or add?
So I guess, thank you. I guess I'm very much a green person. Like if there's something to be done, let's get it done. And I think that as somebody who sits at mile zero, I have a little bit of anxiety when it comes to slides. And so safety and salmon are of definite concern. But I'm now looking at some funding and yeah, I see Trevor Bohay's got answers. And thank you, Terry, for the answers. And can we combine all those and send them out and ask for maybe a meeting of people who want to sit together and punch out some applications? And it would be a good start, I think, just for, meetings throughout the Mid-Fraser areas of concern, if you will. And then yeah, we can start there as far as getting together and looking at grants and funding and a database. Definitely a database, I think, to continue writing any grants. We're going to know what we've got in our hand. And it's great to have all this information, but it seems to be in different pockets. And I think that bringing it all together, that's something the Fraser Basin Council has done already. But it's a lot of work for even just one entity, as far as I can see. Thank you. Thank you, Trevor.
Definitely,
Thank
for
you,
sure.
Terry.
Thanks, Bonnie. Appreciate that very much. Jeremy, Greg, we've just got a 1 minute till 11. I know we scheduled this to go a little bit longer, so I don't want to cut off discussion earlier than folks want to share. So I just want to open it to Jeremy or Greg at this time, see if there's any final thoughts or ideas that you'd like to, any final comments. I see Greg has just put in the comment, I do have an evergreen draft contact list of First Nations communities. So if any other Fraser First Nations want to be on the list, to contact him, and he's got his email in the chat.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll read it out in case some people are on their phone. So my work email is executivedirector@frasersalmon.ca. And one of the first steps to advocating for funding or lobbying the government is to have a group of people who are champions. We all know in politics, whether it be provincial, federal, and First Nations, or people change all the time. Every couple of few years, there's a new chief, new councillor. So the champions are the people who live on the land and who are somebody that we can rely on to pick up the phone and not just screen their calls. So if you want to be on this list going forward, I keep developing it ongoing. We also have a list of all Fraser First Nations for our organization, so that we can keep trying to motivate every single First Nation in the Fraser watershed to join our organization, because we do have a unique agreement with the government to manage all salmon. And this kind of work is related, because without the water, if the water is blocked, there's no salmon. So yeah, please contact me with an email. I work on it on the side of my desk on the Landslide stuff here. I was an independent consultant for the 3-year project, and my organization is not really fully involved yet, but we are looking for funding and capacity to do so. Yeah, that's all I had to say for now. Rish Cooks.
Cooks, Jim, Greg. Jeremy, any final words before we sign out?
Yeah, sure. I think if you're interested in pursuing these kinds of things, if you're interested in learning more about landslides, or you have an idea about monitoring that you'd like to do, I'm really happy to come and talk to your organization. I'd like to be a resource for people that are wanting to start up monitoring programs. So if you want to ask me to come to meetings and to join into things, I'm really happy to do that. Yeah, I'm happy just to be a resource for people for scientific information about the river and to help these processes along. So anyways, I'm happy to take emails and even phone calls and things like that if you want to chat about stuff. And take care.
All right, thanks so much. So we will, Tasha will send out the materials as I mentioned, links and contact information for folks that you've heard from today. I would just like to say thanks both to Jeremy and Greg and to all of you for joining us, especially Jeremy and Greg and Tasha, who've been part of this project all through, Trevor as well. It's been a really rewarding experience, and I would love to continue work on this to support next steps, to support collaboration. If there's any way that we can be of help, we would love to be there. So all the best to all of you, and hopefully we'll be talking again very soon. Thanks very much. Can everybody hear that? Can someone give me a thumbs up?
No. No, can't hear it, Kim.
All right. This is something that, okay, well, maybe what we'll do is, all right, I'll have to figure out why the sound's not coming through. So what we'll do is we'll skip ahead to our 10-minute break. And when we come back, I will be able to hopefully show you the video. So hopefully you can all remain with us for just a 10-minute break. So I'll turn my camera off and my video off, and then when it comes back on, we'll be returning to the presentation. Thanks, everyone. You know you're there. All right, recording in progress. I'm going to go ahead and start the video with sound this time, and you learn something new every day. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it, and I'll share the link as well so that you can view it yourselves after today. It's a really fantastic video. Here we go.